we have the graph of f prime of x in red. I would like to sketch the graph of f of x. So this time we are trying to try something different. So in the previous video, I gave you f of x and I would like you to sketch f prime of x from scratch. So there is no hint at all. You have to do all the analysis by yourself. But this time I gave you 4 graphs of f of x in yellow. So I would like you to do some matching. But when you look for a problem from a textbook or you have online homeworks to do, they usually give you like 4 f prime of x, but they will give you 6 or 8 f of x for you to do the matching. Before we do the matching, I would like to go over the concept that I talk about for f prime of x. So this one, let me just scroll down over here. So do you still remember this from the previous video? So this is for f prime or y prime. So right here, this is for y prime, and then we have the x-axis. So for this graph, here is what we have to look. I simply divide this graph into 4 major regions. So we have the x-axis over here. So we have 2 regions above the x-axis, 2 regions below the x-axis. So for above the x-axis, do we agree that the y prime or f prime is always greater than 0? Greater than 0 means positive. So when the slope, we are talking about y prime, right? Derivative means slope. So for the regions above the x-axis, I divide it into 2 regions, one for big slope and one for small slope. If you don't know what big and small is, you can look at the graph on the right. So if you have a region that is far above the x-axis, we have big y prime. For the regions closer to the x-axis, we have a smaller y prime. So big y prime means we have a big slope, like slope equals to 5, that is very steep. And then smaller y prime, we have slope equals to 1/2, that is less steeper compared to slope equals to 5. And then on the x-axis, that is y prime equals to 0. That means we have a horizontal tangent line. And then below the x-axis, so 2 regions, the one closer to the x-axis, they are all negative. First of all, the numbers below the y value or the y prime below the x-axis, they are all negative. So for the region closer to the x-axis, we have, for example, we have y prime equals to -1/2. That is a smaller y prime. The slope is going downhill, but less steeper. In comparison, we have another region. We have a y prime equals to -5. So that is far below the x-axis. So y prime equals to -5. That is slope equals to -5. That is so much steeper compared to -1/2. So that is what I want you to keep in your mind when you are looking at the graph of y prime. So let's back to our problem. So let's go from left to right. So the one on the left, we have this graph. And then for this graph, I would focus on this region. I would use my highlighter to cut this region out. So what is the difference between this piece and this piece? Do we agree that if you draw a dashed line like that, or here, I think this is more appropriate. If you draw a dashed line like that, the pieces below the dashed line is closer to the x-axis. The piece above the dashed line is far away from the x-axis. So that means the piece above the dashed line has a bigger slope. Below the dashed line has a smaller slope. So let's do some writing. So first of all, the entire curve is above the x-axis. So this curve is above the x-axis. What does that mean? That means y prime is greater than 0. That means for the f of x, the entire graph, the slope must be going up. The slope must be going up for f of x, the entire graph. This is f prime. Okay, this is f prime. And then according to the dashed line I gave you, so let's do it like that. We have a dashed line right here. So above the dashed line, we have bigger y prime, right? So that means the slope is very steep. and then below the dashed line we have small y prime, so that is less steep. All right, so now can you match to one of these graphs? So right here, so if you draw a dashed line like this right here, what can you say about the x value? Do we agree that this x value in this box is closer to the x-axis? So here is what we are thinking. We have to look for a f of x when the curve is close to the x-axis. The graph is very steep. First of all, very important, the entire graph must be going up. So that means that it's not going to be A, right? So A, no. C, no. And then D, no. Because for A, when x is greater than 0, the curve is going down. So the only possible answer is B. So let's take a look at B. When the x value are close to 0, do we agree that this is much steeper compared to this region and this region? So that's why for the first graph, the correct answer is this is B. So this is f prime, and then the correct f of x is graph B. Let's take a look at the next graph. The next graph, we have a f prime right over here. So f prime right over there, what can we say? This is f prime equals to one value, right? What do I mean by one value? That means the slope is always equals to one value. So what kind of function has the same slope throughout its domain? The answer is linear function. If you look at the graph of f of x, it must be linear. So B is taken. The only linear function we have is D, but let's do more analysis. So f prime is in one value, so we have a linear function, and this f prime is below the x-axis. So this below the x-axis. What does that mean? That means the y prime is negative. That means for f of x, the f must be decreasing the entire time. So D is increasing the entire time. So the correct answer is D. All right, so let's take a look at the next graph. So the next graph, we have an upside down parabola. What can we say? The entire graph is below the x-axis, right? So the entire graph is below the x-axis. And then I will cut up the graph like that. I will do a cut right here. So this entire graph is below the x-axis. What does that mean? Below the x-axis. That means y prime is negative. So y prime is negative. So that means for f of x, it must be decreasing the entire time. The slope must be decreasing the entire time. And then what else? And then if you cut this up like that, do we agree that the piece closer to the x-axis, they have smaller y prime? The piece far away from the x-axis, they have a bigger y prime. All right, so that means for the x value, for the x value that is far away from the x-axis, so I should say far away from the y-axis, those two pieces on the left end and the right end, they should have a pretty big slope. So which graph is this? So closer to the x-axis, they have a smaller slope. Far away from the x-axis, they have bigger slope. Which graph stays this? The answer is graph C. So graph C, look at the x value that is closer to the y-axis, closer to the x equals to 0 or y equals to 0. Do we agree that they are less steeper compared to the left end and the right end? So this is less steeper. And then the left end, this is more steeper. Same thing for the right end. So that's why this is graph C. So that means the last graph must be A, but let's do the analysis anyway. So this one is a straight line, but this is f prime of x. So f prime of x, we have a piece above the x-axis and then a piece below. So this is above the x-axis. That means y prime is greater than 0. That means for the function, when x is less than 0, the function is increasing. And then this piece is below the x-axis. That means y prime is negative. So that means when x is greater than 0, the function is what? The function is decreasing, right? So the function is decreasing. So does A describe that? So for A, when x is less than 0, increasing, x greater than 0, decreasing. Okay, that is good. What else can we say? So as if you pick the region that is closer to the x-axis, what can you say? The region closer to the x-axis, the slope is less steeper, right? Because if you pick a point right here and then right there, the y prime is small. Okay, the y prime is small. So that shows me this is graph A is the right choice, because this is less steeper, more steeper, and more steeper. Alright, so that is the end of this video. I know if you just look at the entire piece of work, it is a little bit messy, because for this kind of problem, you get f prime, you sketch f, or you get f, you sketch f prime. There is a lot of thinking, so you have to think a lot, and then you have to do a lot of sketch work, and then you have to do a lot of observation. So it is always this messy, but when you do your works on exam, you can just do this on your scratch paper. All right, so that is the end of this video. If you like it, give me a like, and I will see you all in the next lesson. Signing out.